It's been over 7 months since Nintendo announced we would be getting a new Fire Emblem this year, and there's been radio silence about Fortune's Weave ever since. And I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I'm eagerly awaiting finding out what the next entry in this series has to offer. So, to satisfy my impatience, I've turned to the world of ROM hacks, and thankfully, there's a bunch of them out there for us to play. In fact, there's more than usual right now, because the annual ROM hacking contest, Leaf, just wrapped up a few weeks ago. And in it, a bunch of the most talented hackers of our generation made their earnest attempt at creating a unique and challenging one-chapter hack. For those who are unaware, a one-chapter hack is exactly what it sounds like, a hack that only lasts one chapter. Because it's not the same level of commitment as a full campaign, one-chapter hacks can be a lot more creative with their mechanics, and they get to use really experimental features that might not fit in a full Fire Emblem game, but are still fun to mess about with in a single chapter context. I recently played through all 12 of the publicly available Leaf entries, and I think they've all got something promising to offer. So in this video, I want to go over all the entries I played in the order I played them, and try to give a sales pitch as to why they might be appealing to you. Not every game is going to be for everyone, but I feel like every one of these games is going to be for someone. So without any further ado, let's dive in. Thermopylae is based on the historical Battle of Thermopylae, where Leonidas stood his ground against the Persian army. And as you can expect from that premise, it is a defense map where you control a bunch of hoplites against an overwhelming horde that vastly overpowers you. Your units have fairly low movement, especially compared to the enemy cavalry, and you have limited space to work with, as enemy ballisticians will pepper you if you advance too far forward. But you're not without tools to help your success. Despite being an army that is comprised almost entirely of playable soldiers, everyone has a little niche to make them stand out from each other. There's a Provoke soldier with the Frenzy and Vantage skill who takes a ton of damage but can potentially output lethal amounts as well. There's a soldier who used to be an archer and therefore can use bows and shoots people from distances that the others can't hope to achieve. There's a defensive wary fighter soldier, a rally bot soldier, and of course Leonidas, the leader, has Gale Force, letting him take 2 actions instead of just 1. And you're going to want to utilize these tools to fight against the enemy that, as I mentioned, overpowers you by raw stat numbers. I think one of the coolest things about this is the gameplay story consonance, as I constantly felt on the back foot and had to have my soldiers huddle up in line formation, just like the hoplites would, since they gain defense boosts if they're adjacent to each other. 12 turns may not sound like a lot, but in this defense map, it feels like ages, and you just have to keep trying to hold the line. It Came to Me in Somebody Else's Dream is, as you might expect from the title, an incredibly wacky tale. It takes place in a sort of hybrid between the real world and the magical Fire Emblem one, where people have warp machines, but there's also guns and regular real-world weapons. And the story itself contains a ton of zany humor that really worked for me. I found this to be probably the funniest entry. Much of that humor also translates into the gameplay, as you will get some incredibly wacky units, like Free Will, who can walk through walls, or Jack, the 2-speed swordmaster who makes up for getting doubled by having about 1 billion free actions per turn. And as you might expect from that description, there's a lot going on the gameplay side. In fact, for me, it was a bit too much. The skills alone are pretty overwhelming, but there's also a system-wide overhaul to how health works. Now each player and enemy unit has 2 separate health bars, HP and LP. HP is treated like a sort of armor. It's depleted before LP and it can be healed up, but any damage to LP is more permanent and cannot be healed. And if you ever run out of LP, regardless of whether or not you have HP, you die. It's a pretty cool system and generally intuitive once you get the hang of it. And this, combined with the large amount of skills, makes for a frankly chaotically pleasing gameplay experience. I know this won't be for everyone, there is a lot of overwhelming skill creep, but the people who like it are going to love it. Although it is worth noting that Lex Talionis is a bit of a buggy engine, and I personally ran into an issue that cut my play session short, as Freewill's gimmick just stopped working at some point. They got stuck in a wall and were incapable of moving, and since every character is a game over condition, I couldn't abandon them, so I got softlocked. Definitely soured the experience a bit for me, but this is still a phenomenal and impressive game. Stars Over Burn takes place in an alternate reality of FE6 where Lou and Ray are the twin princes of Burn. Not entirely sure how that happened, but it caused a bunch of other changes, like turning Zeus into an archer or Milady into a dismounted spear knight. Outside of that, it's a mechanically vanilla Fog of War Survive map that takes place on the Vita map from FE7. Although you do get access to some ridiculous tools. My favorites were Hero Narshan with the Rune Sword and 3 separate staffers with infinite use rescues. But since each of the princes also have a personal weapon, there's plenty of cool stuff to choose from. Other than that, this is just a mechanically vanilla Survive map, but it makes good use of the Fog of War and takes a vanilla map and vanilla characters, gives them a fresh coat of paint, and asks you to bathe in the wacky nostalgia, which I'm all here for. If only FE7's actual maps were as fun as this one. Time Marches On is an interesting ROM hack, as it takes the idea of preparations being the most important part of Fire Emblem and dials it up to 11, with a chapter that is almost entirely preparations. Although you won't be doing these preps in a menu. Instead, you navigate a monastery-like town, taking on the role of an aged mentor who teaches a young royal how to do combat. You need to choose how to spend your time wisely. You can go fishing or mining in order to get more money, which you can spend in shops for permanent ability upgrades and skills, or try training them in combat the old-fashioned way, by going to the armory and upgrading their weapon ranks. If you want some experience, which you probably do, the only way to get it is by fighting in the arena. So reclass either the mentor or the trainee into whatever class you want, and try to influence their growths and stats so that they can win in the arena and level up the ways you desire. The town is constantly changing though. As the seasons pass by, different activities become more or less beneficial. And after a full 12 months, the trainee and mentor are launched into a battle that you must win with only these 2 units that you've customized from the ground up. There's a ton of different directions you can go as well. I personally made my trainee into a mage and the mentor into a wyvern, but basically every class is available, including dancer. And depending on your skills, you can focus into things like a crit build, a vantage build, a support role, or anything else your heart desires. There's a lot of depth to the customization, and as such, there's a lot of replay value in Time Marches On. Thracia in Ruin is a tense escape map where you find yourself horribly outmatched by the foes. You have access to a Lance Sword Cavalier, an Axe Sword Great Knight, a sword-wielding villager, and a completely unarmed villager. And each of these characters has one skill that can boost the people near them. Your job is to navigate this puzzle-like castle, safely bringing all 4 characters to the escape point, as every single one is a game over. But there's a time pressure, as scary reinforcements will show up eventually and mark your doom. Because of how limited your tools are alongside the scarcity of healing, this feels less like a traditional SRPG and much more like a puzzle game in the Sacred Stones engine. But it is a damn interesting puzzle, and very entertaining to find out how to manage your synergies in order to overcome foes who both have the numbers and stats advantage on you. The story is also quite intriguing, and very much has Prologue of Thracia vibes, with the kingdom falling and the prince and princess fleeing with their retainers. And that's not a coincidence. This is meant to be the prelude to a full project coming soon. So if you're interested in that, consider this to be a sneak preview of how it might play out. Transient Paths is another game where your resources are limited compared to the enemies, although this time instead of fighting humans, you're fighting monsters. And you have a number of tricks up your sleeve in order to even the playing field. Your two characters are a Swordmaster and a Cleric. The Swordmaster is doing most of the combat, although the Cleric's support role is not to be underestimated, as she can create warp portals to teleport your units, Sacred Ground in order to protect from AoE Demon King attacks, Light Ruins to protect you from the incoming monsters, and she can force critical hits with one of her staves, which are otherwise just not going to happen. Your Swordmaster isn't entirely vanilla either though. She has the ability to chain attacks between enemies close by, although this takes 4 turns to recharge, so you can't just spam it out willy-nilly. You want to save it for when as many people as possible are close by, and then hit all of them with a chained critical hit for a satisfying and devastating murder. But you can't murder everyone. The Demon King will absolutely stomp your face in. So the goal of the map is to survive until reinforcements can show up with the one weapon capable of slaying it. But unlike vanilla survive maps, this one is incredibly hard. You can't just cheese it by hitting end turn. And it's very satisfying to find the path to victory in the face of overwhelming defeat. Lambent Tale to Hell and Back is an SRPG studio game with an interesting gimmick. The map's objective is to break into a prison, free the prisoners, and let all the green units escape. And as such, this turns into something of a rescue and escort quest. I always like when Fire Emblem tries new objectives. Burning Crates is still one of my favorite maps for just that reason. So personally, I was already hooked by the premise alone, but if that's not enough to sell it on you, it's just a well-designed map with an interesting cast of playable units that push you to divide and conquer before you get overwhelmed. Also, a great example of how Fog of War maps can actually be good when designed by someone who doesn't work at Intelligent Systems. An informed second look is an exercise in meta-narrative nonsense, as it initially appears to be a pretty straightforward map, but as you start to play through it, the narrator corrects some details, making several of your units weaker, rearranging map tiles, and introducing some other fun twists I don't want to spoil. It makes for a really fun map that I personally think is better experienced blind than anything. So if the premise sounds interesting, check it out for yourself without looking up any further details. The gimmick of Union Cast is pretty simple. It's a generic siege map, but all of your units are staff locked, so you can't participate in traditional combat. Instead, you need to manipulate the enemies with the staves you have at your disposal. Among your staves are obvious staples like warp, rescue, and healing abilities, but there's also some interesting terrain adjustment staves that destroy bridges to make it harder for enemies to reach you. And this makes for a really cool, frantic feeling where you are rapidly terraforming to try and keep enemies off your tail while helpless to their combat if they ever reach you. It's a feeling unlike anything I've ever experienced in Fire Emblem, but a welcome change of pace and a pretty creative map. Light Everlasting Invasion Force doesn't have any sort of special gimmick or hook. Instead, it's just a really well-designed vanilla hack. You take control of a squad of units that feel plucked right out of a GBA game. You got all the classic archetypes here. Fight your way through the city against hordes of foes and potentially stop to do some shopping and bolster up your forces. It feels like something that would be right at home in the middle of a full campaign, and in part, that's because it's planned to be. This is sort of a snapshot preview of a larger project the author is working on. Which is nice, because it means if you liked this chapter, then you can wait for the full project and get to play more like it. Tactical transitioning is exactly what you think it is. A game where transing your gender is optimal. In fact, you want to trans your gender multiple times if possible. You see, every enemy on the map is flagged with either male or female, and they can only deal damage to units of that specific gender. So by constantly swapping between male and female using things like your Brazil juice, the gender dance, or male force skill, you're able to keep your otherwise fragile units safe while trying to make your way through this frantic and chaotic escape map. Finally, transgender emblem. Last, but certainly not least, we have Empty Halls, and this is another staff-focused map. Although it's a little bit different from Union Cast, as it is a defense-oriented map where all of your units are staffers, and you need to make use of utility staffs to hold the line against aggressive villagers who want food and a living wage. But don't worry, because you can also throw human bodies at the problem, as anytime an enemy kills one of your units, they take a point of damage. So in addition to using staves defensively, you want to use sacrifices offensively. I'm beginning to think that we might be the bad guys, actually. And with that being said, that's all 12 of the games that you can play right now. Although it's worth noting there is a 13th entry, Endgame, which is not currently publicly available, and is being played by the judges of the contest, although it will be made public once the winner of the contest is announced. I'm curious if any of you have played these Leaf games, and if so, which ones were your favorites and why? Let me know in the comments down below. As for me, my favorites were probably Empty Halls and Time Marches On. Although, as I said, I enjoyed all of the games I played, and I think every single one of them has some sort of special idea in it. With that being said, let's keep it brief and thank my patrons. Thank you to Logs, Glup Shido, Erica Ford, Pergnite, YLO1, George Grenville the 7th PM, Jamie Collins, Arvis, Floahay, Amy Hazel, Hungry Heart, Hound Dogs, Burnt to Cinders, Ziggy WSB, Lovis Roman, Shinthia, Faulty Videos, Kyle Madison, Derek Williams, Anna Cabana, The Daily Fugle, Faye, Magic Bite, Thoughtful Insanity, Robin Goodfeller, JT Spritter, Laura Hunter, Dysike, Chris, Root Beer Pants, Queen Elizam, Control Tages, Roman Cormancic, Nick Knack, Hammersmack, Carrier Has Left, Angel Nop Caceres, Zanwiff, Not Gino, Name Number 5, Squid Stats, Flynn Gone, Edward C, Cabbage, Caius Cole, Bree, Punchfighter Champion, Eggman, Maxine the Vampire Queen, Sardonic Muse, Wesley Toma, Sensitive Luigi, Rage, Dr. Frying Pan, Toon, Tursi P, Femtal Illness, Wannabe Cinnabon, Punk Tattoo Guy, Key the Iron Idol, Jackson McMahon, Saren Gurlixy, Rezi, Dino Anna, Andu, Ria, Gameboo, Carosa, Fyrant, Your Doctor, Frozen Helm, KH, Girl Boss, Lizard Bongwater, Christopher Bueno, Marin McLean, Jaden, Dylan Solis, Some Trades, Alice, Smaz Ruby, Robin D, LNB, Thaythom, Klon, Pillow Willow, Gabe the Green, and especially my Jagans, him and Rowan, Siggy, Drakenback Lancer, and Autumn. If you would like to support the channel, there is a link to my Patreon down below, but please only donate if you can comfortably afford to do so. Also linked below are all of the various ROM hacks that I reviewed in this video, so check them out if you're interested. But regardless of what you choose to do, I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe, gamers.